right, we're live now. So go ahead, team. I'm going to remove myself from the stream.
Thanks very much, Dalia. Hi, everyone. Thanks to those of you who've joined. Welcome to the Meetup for August 2021. We'll kick off in a minute or two. I just want to give people a bit more time to join. And then when we have enough people in the watching the stream in the room, we'll kick it off. Okay, so to those of you who are on the stream, let me quickly share the agenda. So we're going to go through initially a quick recap of the Elastic South Africa Meetup, what the group is about. Really, this is probably, I think it's the first one this year, but even I suppose even worse than that, it's the first one in about 9 months. So we haven't had one since November in 2020. One of the reasons for that was I think everyone just had a lot of Zoom fatigue, and then 2021 kicked off with a bang. So we haven't had a meetup this year, so I'm really excited to just kick this off again. But hopefully we have new people joining who weren't on previous meetups, and hopefully people watch the recording of this because we have this new platform which allows us to capture this and make it a lot easier to record and to share. So we'll go through a recap of the group. We'll look at release updates, something which has become fairly common with Elastic is that we release roughly every 8 to 10 weeks. So there's been a few releases since our last meetup. And then I'm going to run a bit of an experiment. I'm going to present something that I've been working on that's been in the back of my mind for a while. It's a presentation aimed sort of, maybe it's less technical, but aimed more at helping technical folks level up their careers, think about how they can use the Elastic Stack to, I suppose, improve or potentially improve their lives, but also just help them in their career growth. So we hopefully make sense and comes together. Like I said, it's somewhat of an experiment. I'm looking for feedback as well at the end of this, so hopefully that goes well. So let's see, where are we? 3 minutes past. Okay, so let me introduce myself for those of you who don't know me, who are watching the stream. My name's Tim Brophy. I'm the Senior Solutions Architect for Elastic based in South Africa. The remit that I cover is Africa as a whole, as well as I'm lucky enough to kind of look after some financial services clients in the UK as well during this sort of global lockdown phase, because it's not necessary or it's not possible to go and meet clients. So that's given me a lot more exposure to the UK financial services market. But really, I've been with Elastic for 2 years now. And over those 2 years, just seeing how the company itself has grown, how the offerings that we have grown exponentially. It's been also interesting to see how Elastic in South Africa has grown a huge amount. So hopefully this is like a phase 2 of our meetup groups, and I'll be running these in future. Just on that, if you do, I'll have some links at the end of the session. But if you do have topics or talks, topics you'd like to hear about, or talks that you would like to hear or potentially give, by all means, please reach out to me. There are some links at the end of this presentation on our community platform as well. You can reach out to us that way. So really, this is the goal here, is to create a bit more of a, I suppose, inclusive and comprehensive community in South Africa around Elastic. Okay, so let's crack on with the first agenda item. So this is the Elastic. Oh, and also, sorry, let me say, so we have the ability to see comments. I'll be watching the comment stream on the right-hand side over here. So if you do have questions as we go through the session, please, by all means, don't be shy. Type them in, and I'll take a look when they do come through. So what is the purpose of our meetup groups? This isn't an official view. This is a slide I put together because this is really what I would like our meetup group to be all about. Primarily, I see this as let's call it a non-outcome oriented source of information. So most people that I speak to on a daily basis, when I'm sharing information about Elastic and about what we're doing, it's with the intention of, growing an account, or selling more licenses, or winning new business, etc. And for me, it's really important to just share the goodness of Elastic without sort of this, can we have an outcome of a sale? It's more about building a community. So really, this is just giving the broader community an opportunity to come in and hear about updates we've got or we've made to the platform, things that we're looking at doing in future, and potential opportunities that you have, I suppose, within the community, but also opportunities to engage with us, to also be part of the community, to present at things like our Global Elasticon, to present on meetup groups, and essentially also expose yourself to other parts of the worldwide community group. That being said, brings me nicely to the next point, which is I see this as an opportunity to show off or share your own usage of Elastic. Had this conversation with a number of clients, and I think a lot of us work in corporate environments where you can't just decide out of your own accord you're going to show how you're doing, let's say, for example, some kind of fraud detection use case using Elastic. So I'm not looking necessarily for anyone to kind of break corporate governance or do anything like that, but I'd love to know, I think at a high level, people would be interested to know how companies are using Elastic to, make, I suppose, more cost efficient or drive innovation, drive value. We're not looking to get IP off of anyone, but it would be just fantastic to see the kinds of implementations that are running around the world and around the country. Hopefully, in a kind of, don't know if we'll ever live in a post-COVID world, but in a post everyone getting vaccinated world, maybe we'll have networking opportunities where we can meet in person, face to face. The last face-to-face meetup group I went to was before I joined Elastic, so that sort of puts it into context. It's been a couple of years of these virtual meetups, which haven't been fantastic, to be honest. So hopefully one day we'll be able to network and share knowledge and share a pizza and a drink, hopefully. Also, the aim here is also to give best practice guidance, again, not in a consulting or support kind of way, more of a just sharing with the community. I'll be making sure that we get people in the next few presentations or next meetups that talk about the best practice implementations of Elastic. I think in the most recent, or one of the last ones at the end of the year, we had Johannes on our support team talking about sharding. That's something that's like really critical to everyone who's running a cluster. So we want to do that again and bring expertise from guys who are on our support team, or folks who are on our support team. I shouldn't use the word guys, but the expertise that live on our support team, and bringing those people to the fore so they can share their knowledge, and you can benefit from that. And then lastly, I feel like oftentimes I'm kind of running this and setting this up and doing it, in kind of whenever it sort of makes sense for me to do this. But if there is someone in the community or people in the community who really want to try and make it into something that they feel would be valuable, please reach out to me. I'm really open to getting direction from everyone who's using Elasticsearch, paid, open source, free, doesn't really matter. Okay. No comments yet, but if you do feel the urge to type in a comment and send something, please let me know. Or please go ahead and do it. Don't have to let me know. So Elastic has a number of really great upcoming events. I'm just checking time. I want to make sure we give everyone a little bit of time back. An hour is a long time to ask of your Thursday evening. So we have like amazing events coming up in the next couple of months. I'm going to go like to the bottom of the page, Elasticon Global. So that's going to be another one of these global Elasticon events, which is really fantastic. Like information from all over the world, knowledge sharing from all over the world. Please register. So it's elastic.co/elasticon/global. Then going back to the top, so Dahlia shared with in the chat the limitless XDR with Elastic Security. So I'm going to touch a little bit on that, but I'm not going to go into the deep dives on what we've done with our Elastic Security sort of like limitless XDR platform and security application. It's really exciting. The guy presenting on that meetup, James Spiteri, is like probably one of the best resources in Elastic to explain what we're capable of in the security space. So that's when is that? 2nd of September. So that's next week. By all means, please sign up for that. I definitely will be. And then on the 7th, we have full cycle observability with the Elastic Stack and Lateral. So again, please sign up. So that's all about our observability stack. A huge amount of value that you can get out of using Elastic Observability. Okay, so release updates. So I've sort of mentioned a little bit that what we do at Elastic is we roll a minor release every, used to be 12 weeks. It seems to have accelerated somewhat. What we're really seeing is that it's more like 8 weeks these days. We call them minors. Most organizations would definitely consider them major releases, just out of interest. So currently we're on 7.14, 7 being the major and the 14 being the minor release version. We have also, I haven't mentioned it in the slides, but it's just thought about it now, is worth mentioning. We've released an alpha release of Elasticsearch 8, which is the next major. So I don't have a date for major. It'll be next calendar year, but you can try it out if you want to be like super cutting edge and you want to get up on like ahead of the curve in terms of preparing for Elasticsearch version 8. Typically, a major release is every couple of years. Major releases constitute significant platform changes under the hood. I wouldn't say mostly API driven, or mostly sort of around the core API, but pretty much anything that requires it goes into a major release relates to the core API of Elasticsearch. So just bear that in mind. We have 8 on the roadmap for some time next calendar year. We have made an alpha candidate available, so you can try that out. Just checking the comments, nothing. Okay, good. All right. So for those of you who are watching this currently live, or maybe picked up the recording, not familiar with the Elastic Stack, or you've been using the Elastic for years, but maybe you're not familiar with what we've been doing over the last couple of years around sort of focusing on in our 3 solution areas. What the Elastic Stack fundamentally is an index data store, right? So we store JSON documents, we index the fields in those JSON documents in an inverted index, which is based off of Apache Lucene, and we have an ecosystem around that data store, mostly, I suppose, most prominently presented by Kibana. Kibana being the window into the Elastic Stack. Elasticsearch itself is entirely REST API driven. So anything you can do in Kibana, barring generating a visualization, you could still generate a visualization using the API. You just have to create that visualization yourself. But all the visualizations are based on API calls. All the interfaces are communicating with the Elasticsearch API. Everything in Elasticsearch is REST API driven. Elasticsearch ships with like a core query language called Query DSL, which is again also JSON based, and it's a very sophisticated way of searching through massive amounts of data. What makes Elasticsearch fundamentally quite special and very different is that we can scale horizontally without any kind of additional add-ons or licensing or tooling. It's a native component of the stack. Horizontal node scaling is part of the platform. That's how it was designed from the beginning, from the ground up. So we're optimized for search speed. We're optimized for handling huge amounts of scale, And because of the sophistication of the query language, we're optimized for relevance when you're looking for data. So for many years, I mean, the company itself is around 9 years old now. I suppose the Elasticsearch brand is around 9 years old, and Elasticsearch has been used in open source projects around the world. It's been used in Fortune 500 companies. Is used in enterprises to solve problems. But what we found is that there are 3 core use cases that Elasticsearch is used for, and that is at the core search. The second being I'd say primitively logs and metrics, or let's call it logging, because searching log files is a real pain when you need to tail a log file on a host and look for error messages. Much easier to put them into Elasticsearch and query those log files or visualize them in Kibana. And then we saw a lot of use cases pivoting towards security. So what we've done is we've created 3 solutions: enterprise search, observability, and security. And then in terms of getting data into the platform to make those solutions come alive, we have a Beats and Logstash ingestion architecture. This slide is probably due for an upgrade as well, because we also have new in the last few releases, but currently in 7.14, it's been officially released as a GA, or generally available component of the platform, and that's the Elastic Agent. So now we've moved from lightweight data shippers like Beats that are written in Go, and they collect metrics and log files from system services, and they send them over to Elasticsearch. We now have built the capability to have one agent that can do many things, not only gather data, but also do proactive security related things. But I'll kind of get onto that. We also still have our ETL tool called Logstash, which is used, fairly ubiquitously. Logstash has the ability to read log files, read data sources, do things like read SNMP v3 traps, etc. There's a myriad of different inputs. And effectively, you can mutate that data, transform it, enrich it, and then ship it to Elasticsearch. You can scale Logstash horizontally if you have a huge amount of events per second. I think we have certain instances of clients that are doing easily 1 million events a second, and Logstash can scale horizontally to work with that kind of event load. It also works very well with things like Apache Kafka, ingestion pipelines, and those kinds of tools, messaging tools. But I digress. So enterprise search and observability and security are kind of our core solutions. They are not sold with different licenses. You essentially license the Elastic Stack. So you license the number of nodes you need to run your data. And these tools basically are free on top of the platform. Now, the level of sophistication and the kinds of features that you get with those tools and the kind of underlying security that you get with the platform differs somewhat as you go up the kind of the tiering and the license model. But these tools are all available as part of the basic version. Okay, I'm just going to keep an eye on time. That was a lot of 20 minutes is a long time to spend on so few slides. So what have we missed? So there was a huge event that happened, I suppose, event in the life cycle of Elastic, or as someone who kind of lives and breathes Elastic every day. And that is when we went live with 7.10, which was in early this year, it was around January. We made a call that the very next release would no longer be available in the open source version, or as an open source version of the platform. So we decided that we were going to take all future versions of Elastic out of open source, or not conforming to the definition of open source, and move it to what we call the Elastic License version 2, or ELv2. Now, ELv2 follows is it the SPSS, SPSL, the acronym escapes me, but it's SSPL licensing model, which was developed by Mongo, and follows a similar kind of wording and a similar intention, right? The idea being we needed to protect the core IP that we were delivering from being essentially packaged and delivered as a managed service by a a large competitor of ours, large competitor and partner. I'm not going to dive into philosophical debates around that stuff. I'm not going to even get into the complexities of it. It was just a decision that we made to essentially restrict access to some of our sort of core open source, our core code capabilities, and no longer make it available as an open source license. Since 7.14, we focused on some like high level principles that have kind of evolved in maturity as we've gone all the way through to 7.14. The high level principles have basically been drive down the cost of keeping data for longer. So as you keep data for longer, normally in the traditional licensing model, you've got to pay more. What we're trying to do is make it cheaper to keep data for longer by leveraging things like searchable snapshots. Offload data, put it onto a snapshot, which is cheap and fairly, let's call it not necessarily performance storage, but you still want your data to be online. So we've figured out a way to take something like an S3 bucket or blob storage in Azure, or some like a network file share in your environment, and query that data as if it was online, but it doesn't use spinning disk in your cluster, which you then need to say spinning disk, but it doesn't use expensive either solid state or spinning disk in your cluster that you need to license. So you can keep it in a cheap storage area that is not licensed as part of your node count. So what that means is that you can keep data for years and keep it online and searchable. And yes, it's not millisecond response time, at least not initially. It can get much faster as it gets cached if it's frequently queried, but you have access to that data online. So that was a major innovation. It's only available in our enterprise licensing tier. But basically what we've done in terms of some of our total cost of ownerships is that we've proven that by going from even the free version of Elastic and storing data for a long period of time, from a hardware point of view, it's much cheaper to pay for Elastic as an enterprise license and reduce the amount of hardware you need to keep your data for, which is really quite a phenomenal achievement. We've also tried to improve the overall user experience all the way from ingestion to operational data analysis. We've improved our security detections. We've continually improved our endpoint agent capabilities, or the Elastic agent. We've moved our enterprise search. There used to be separate capabilities. We've moved that into Kibana and into the platform experience as a whole. We've continually enhanced the Elastic agent, Elastic APM, our user experience capabilities, as well as introduced synthetics into the platform. And our observability in that sort of stream is still like a huge focus of ours, and we're working extremely hard and improving the platform with every single release. Our observability solution becomes more and more compelling with every release, and the Kibana UI itself has gradually improved. Like I say, gradually improved dramatically, because there are small things that have changed in it, which if you looked at a high level, wouldn't make a huge difference. But the reality is, working in Kibana is intensely better than it ever used to be. It just keeps getting easier to use, keeps being just more refined, more together, and more cutting edge. So our user experience is really good. And then we've also really looked at things like our alerting capability. So the ability to take data in the platform that your environment's generating, sticking it into the platform, and creating alerts. And then what do you do with those alerts? Sending them to external systems like ServiceNow, sending them to Slack, sending them to PagerDuty, sending emails, etc. To the point where we've actually looked at those alerts, what used to be called watches. Now we're moving them into this kind of like rules, alerts, and cases, and moving those into their own sort of, let's call it a platform capability. And treating them as first-class citizens, so it's not an afterthought. So there's been a huge amount of amazing development under the hood. It's a real privilege to kind of have a view on what's happening there. I'm not seeing any comments, so hopefully we have some folks in the stream. I won't spend too much time on this, but really, this focuses on that licensing change. So really, in the past, what AWS was doing was offering something called the AWS ES, or the AWS Elasticsearch Service. And that was really just an OSS version of Elasticsearch delivered as a managed service on AWS that you could provision and buy through AWS. In 2018, what we did was we created this thing called XPack. We took certain features and we said these are not open source features. Index lifecycle management. So that's critical to keeping your data for longer. Kibana spaces, which is a huge security, let's call it like a stovepipe or like demarcation in Kibana. Our mapping capabilities, advanced security settings, machine learning, things like that. We took those off and we put them in the XPack, and those could not be used as open source. We made that code available though, so that code is still open. And then we also had what we called we created our basic license, which wasn't open source or isn't open source, but essentially our open source platform could still be repurposed and resold. That's changed. So as of 2021, release 7.11 onwards, that's completely changed. So there's no ability for AWS to take essentially what we believe is fundamentally our code and packages it as a managed service. And look, there's probably like millions of words written about that. There's loads of blogs and tweets and things that cannot center around that. But that is just the reality of what we've done. From a realism point of view, I want to say, like, what are the facts? The reality is that we've been contributing 95% to the Elasticsearch code base. We have over 800 dedicated Elasticsearch engineers or Elastic engineers working on the various solutions on the core stack. That number is probably outdated because I think the slide is a few months old, and we're on an expansion drive. We're continually building our engineering team, and you can trace 95% of the contributions to Elasticsearch to Elastic engineers. So that really, like, you could see how, from our perspective, we're building a platform and a product and a service, and it's essentially being picked up and packaged and sold elsewhere. So that's really the crux. And how does that affect? So let me say, like, before I go on to release updates, how does that affect, or how did? Because I think we've kind of been over this, but maybe if this is a contentious issue for anyone watching the stream, how does that affect you as the end user? It absolutely doesn't. Like, as long as if you're using an Elasticsearch version, so if you're using a basic license or a paid license, totally fine. You don't get affected. Nothing changes. If you're using AWS ES, from here on forward, there's going to be a path of development for Elasticsearch, and there's going to be a path of development for something called OpenSearch, which is what AWS's project is called, or their new service. There will not be, I suppose there'll be some code that'll be carried across from previous versions from what was Elasticsearch, but nothing new will be Elasticsearch developed. So as a sort of AWS ES client or consumer and using that service, just kind of have to take that into account. From a current existing Elasticsearch user, like I mentioned, unless you, I suppose, quite frankly, there's no impact at all. Right. Okay, that was the one, I suppose, potentially contentious topic to come through. So I haven't seen any comments in the stream, so that's fine. So we'll move on to release updates. So the first one is Elastic Security. So there was an acquisition, literally came through when I first joined the company. So it's almost 2 years old now. And that was an acquisition or what we call joining forces with a company called Endgame. Endgame had a very, very sophisticated endpoint agent. And we've slowly but surely been integrating the Endgame capabilities. The Endgame security team is really amazing. And this team of people have built something fairly phenomenal, and we've been including that into the core Elasticsearch application and solution. Really, what the big milestone that we've just released with 7.14 is what we call limitless XDR. So unifying a SIEM with an endpoint security platform for analysts everywhere. So the endpoint security platform can do a huge amount of things. And I would heavily encourage you attend the next meetup around XDR next week. That's been posted in the chat. you'll get a huge amount of insight into why we refer to that as limitless. It really is basically, it really is limitless. It's not actually a marketing term. I would consider it a technical definition of detect and respond. So the release highlights on 7.14 for security have basically been things like automated prevention. So having the Elastic agent doing like stopping ransomware on Windows systems, Linux systems are on the roadmap. And then also like completely free and open anti-malware across hosts of every operating system. So at the moment today, let's say you don't, in your organization, your company, you might be like 15 people. Do you have an AV, an antivirus? Do you have an anti-malware platform? If you don't, it's fairly easy. You go to elastic.co, you download the agent. If you want to run a cluster in cloud that collects the data, or you want to run a cluster locally on a VM or a container or something, you deploy the Elasticsearch cluster, and you're protected for free, basically. So there's very little that you need to do from a kind of payment point of view. You just have to run the infrastructure to keep your data. So we have a free and open anti-malware, essentially antivirus and ransomware detection platform. The ransomware detection portion of it is licensed. There is a detailed kind of licensing model, but the endpoint protection and the ability to like do moving into the next thing, like generating alerts with shipped detection rules that are based on like patterns of behavior and are mapped to the MITRE framework. Those things are all free as well. So we've extended our detection patterns. We ship with roughly, I think it's something ridiculous, like 450 detection rules. Some of those are based on static rules, and some of them are based on queries. And like basically, if this query results in a record response, then there's an issue. And some of them are based on anomaly detection. So some of them are based on like what was the case yesterday and the day before and the day before, and what's different today. And if something is different, raise an alarm. We've also, around that detection, we've included what's called OS Query, which was something I didn't know about, but it's a Facebook derived or developed essentially platform to query an operating system as if it was a database. So uses fairly common like SQL, and you can query your host environments as if you were just talking to a SQL database, which is really good. And then we've extended our response capability. So what we're able to do now is with the Elastic agent, you can isolate a compromised host from within Kibana. So you can say, take that host offline, but let me still speak to it and do things and collect data, but take it off the rest of the network, which is really, pretty phenomenal. And we've also built a lot around our kind of workflow integrations and the way that you can do triaging and threat hunting and all sorts of things. And then also extending our integration capability. So we can send cases, for example, to ServiceNow. I will say that that's a licensed feature. But if you're using ServiceNow, I'm sure you can, you'd be using a licensed version of Elastic. But now we can also send alerts through an out-of-the-box connector to Swimlane, which is a SOAR platform. So you can automate your response to issues that you pick up in your environment. Again, so we've just to go back to like the different phases of an attack, or the different phases of like how security platforms work. But we have prevent, collect, detect, and respond. From the prevention point of view, like we said, malware prevention, ransomware prevention. We can also do post-execution prevention, right? So we'll look at, the pre-execution is what's happening on the host. Can I pick up an issue? And if I do, I'll fire an alarm. Then post-execution is, am I getting data into the platform? Let me analyze that data across a huge data set and we pick up if there's been some kind of behavioral change. From collecting point of view, so Elastic Agent looks at kernel level data collection. So we're not looking at sysmon, we're not looking at certain system like tools that can be bypassed by threats. We're looking at the kernel, we're collecting data from the kernel. There's a lot around detecting. We've got threat intelligence built into the platform now, which is really great. So you can get threat intelligence feeds into your environment. We've also decoupled our sort of rules and detection engine from our release cycle. So you don't have to wait for 7:15 for us to respond with a pre-built detection rule to an instance of some kind of threat that's out in the wild. And then from a respond point of view, like I've mentioned, connections to external systems and external case connectors. So you can see we've got Swimlane, ServiceNow, Jira, IBM Resilient, etc. And then I've spoken about some of the Elastic Agent capabilities in terms of host isolation and OS query. Elastic Observability, so this is one I'm very comfortable with and very familiar with, and I use a lot. But observability is just getting better from a point of easier onboarding and making it easier to get started. The big one being that Elastic Agent is now GA. So it's one agent you can deploy onto a host, and then centrally from Kibana, you can choose what kind of data you want to collect. You don't have to go onto, I'll get into the details, I shouldn't get ahead of myself, but it makes onboarding the data much easier. From a unified observability experience, a single pane of glass, the apps look very similar, the experience is very similar across that observability stack, and it's easy to go from my user is experiencing an issue through the user experience view of the world, diving into APM, looking at application traces, diving into the spans of that application, looking at the logs of the microservice, or the container, or the host, or the virtual machine that's servicing that application, or serving it up through a web server. Whatever the case is, it's a seamless experience. It really is super uniform. So there's no like multi-tabbing and swivel chairing and different tools all over the place. It makes life very easy, especially if you've got like an SRE kind of role and you're ultimately responsible for the resilience of the uptime of the platform. And then actionable observability. So basically improving the mean time to detect an issue. So making use of machine learning, for example, in more advanced ways to detect issues before they are actually picked up by your end users. A lot of the stuff I've spoken about, barring machine learning and some of the connectors and things, those are all free. So again, there's not you don't have to be a paid customer to get the features and the capabilities that you need. I guess Elastic Agent is kind of a theme through security and observability, but instead of before Filebeat, Metric-beat, Heartbeat, Endpoint for security, Winlog-beat for Windows data on every host, now you deploy Elastic Agent, and you can configure that and manage the group centrally in Kibana using our fleet management tool. So it's massively easier. There's no Jenkins scripts that you need to worry about every time you want to add a configuration to your kind of like filebeat.yaml or your metricbeat.yaml or the module YAML, like the particular module YAML file. It's now no more, I suppose, using your keyboard to configure paths and figure out like patterns, and like Logstash probably is even more work. But as easy as Filebeats and Metric-beats are to collect logs, you still have to go onto every single host. And even if you're doing it via an automation script, you've got to manage that automation script. So now, yes, you may automate the deployment of Elastic Agent, but you can choose which data to collect based on the host profile, based on the grouping of that agent. So it makes it massively, massively easier to collect data from an environment. And your use case expansion, which I'll get into in a bit, is so much easier. Enterprise search, the big news is I've spoken about it already. It's just integrating a lot of those two separate apps, the workplace search and the app search, integrating them into Kibana. So they're essentially in one place. So no more popping out new windows to manage your app search environment or your workplace search anymore. And we also had our Elastic crawler for app search go live as well. So you don't have to ingest documents into your app search engine anymore. Now you can deploy your crawler on your front end, and it can crawl your website and ingest those documents as if you had done a post into the engine as well at the same time. So I put questions up. I mean, it's obviously a stream, so that we can't have the live discussion like we had on Zoom before. But I haven't seen anything come in the chat yet. So I'll move on. I know I made the bold claim of saying I'd be done at 45 minutes too, which clearly I'm not going to hit. But like I said, this portion of the meetup is kind of more of an experiment from our side to see if it resonates. Okay, so I'm going to take a pause and just see if there's anyone who has anything else that they'd like to say. Okay, yeah, so that was the release updates. That took actually surprisingly a high amount of detail that's gone into the last few releases, and I really just scratched the surface. So please go onto our events page to see kind of more in-depth views and demos of these enhancements. So I kind of had a look at what would be really useful. Let's put myself in the shoes of someone who doesn't work at Elastic, but I'm running an Elastic cluster, or I'm a developer. I work in the DevOps space. Maybe I'm an SRE. We're not using Elastic. I'd like to use Elastic, or we are using a bunch of tools. Like, what would be really useful? So I sort of came up with this talk, and one of the things that kind of prompted it as well was every single case study that is on our website, the elastic.co website, is about people, right? It's about people getting value. So like every now and again at an ElasticCon or even like at one of our internal kickoff events, we have roundtables with customers, and it's people who are leading change in their organization. So it's especially so like Audi, for example. I mean, the stuff that this part of this innovation portion of their business is doing is phenomenal, and they're doing it with Elastic. So I think it's just really interesting how there's always this like people pick up on value and pick up on the uniqueness of the Elastic Stack, and they run with it. So I wanted to kind of look at that and share it with our kind of community. Thanks for the positive. I don't know how to pronounce it, your username, but thanks for the comment. I appreciate it. So I went off and I said, okay, cool. So there's all these case studies, people, doing great things. So what are the common themes? So there's operational enhancements, like how do we make our lives better at work and doing our jobs? How do we get meaningful insights and learn the stuff we don't know? Some case studies are about efficiencies. So we for example, look at how can we get more time for other things? So driving more efficiency in the business. How can we get cost efficiency, like spend less but do more? But everything is driven by this core team of champions. I will answer the question in the chat just once I've gone through this, but I'll put in at the end of the discussion. Sorry, at the end of the meetup, I'll answer that question in the chat there. And then I looked at, so let's look at career research. So I Googled a couple of articles, read some blogs, and did a bit of reading. And I looked at what is the common themes. And this is like my personal view, right? So none of the stuff is like an Elastic, I suppose, like sanctioned kind of material. This is something that Tim Brophy has put out. But from my perspective, there are common themes in the career research I've done. People who are promoted quickly or maybe promoted faster than other people who rise in their career have a couple of common things. They maintain connections with people, right? So they maintain connections to executives, to colleagues, and it's all by who you know, right? These people solve problems. They want to focus on solving problems. They also get noticed. So they're kind of front and center. They have a growth mindset. Now, I think that this is important to go with get noticed, because being noticed is kind of, it's a totally two-edged sword. Because if you get noticed, but you're not like growing a business or growing value or seeing the bigger picture, then you're just getting noticed for potentially the wrong reasons because you're making noise. And these people can, very often create value and ultimately make a difference. So let me just pause on that one for a second. So actually, let me answer this question. Just let me pause about Elastic Agents and Filebeat. Yes, you can run them on the same host. 100% you can run the beats and the agent on the same host for a period of time. I will send out a communication. I think at the end of this, I think we've got a blog around this or some kind of formal, but this was a discussion recently. Didn't want to leave that one hanging there for too long. So, but thanks for the question. So when we look at common challenges that we see in our companies, right? So you see them all around us, but let's just look at think about back in the day when you were in an office or speaking to colleagues. Some of the common things that I experienced were I can't find what I'm looking for. Or what I hear from lots of our clients, we don't have visibility about that part of the application. I wish there was an easier way or an easy way to do this. There's no budget for the tools. We know what the challenge is. We know how to solve it. But we don't have budget for that. And the one thing which it's not super common, but I think it's really relevant is we don't know what we don't know. And the first time I heard that, I kind of laughed it off. Must have heard it about 5 or 6 years ago, but it's a fairly disastrous thing, not knowing what you don't know, because you don't have visibility on the things that you should be doing or the insights you should be getting. So with that in mind, thinking about those problems, wanting to be someone who grows their career, thinking about those attributes of people who are successful in their roles and do get promoted and do level up their careers, what can we do, right? So as individuals. So how can Elastic help that happen? So Elastic can help you get more value from an existing investment because of the fact that we don't penalize our clients for adopting new use cases. When you look at our pricing model, let's say you were running an Elasticsearch backend or cluster, and you were using it primarily for search. That's fine. That same cluster, okay, even though you might think, oh, okay, but the search use case is very different. It's true, like the search use cases and the log and metrics use cases are different, but it's very easy if you're running Elasticsearch to either create a new cluster for logs and metrics, or test logs and metrics on an existing cluster by adding new types of data into your cluster. So let's say from an observability point of view, you wanted to collect more data externally. So we don't do agent-based pricing. We don't do ingest-based pricing. So you can bring as much data to the platform. You can delete it after a day. You don't have to have this data that sits on the platform for days and years. That needs to be then stored on nodes that all need to be licensed. You can choose what to do with your data. So we say don't drop data on the floor. From an Elastic security point of view, the capability and the functionality is there. We don't charge per seat or per ingest or per endpoint. So there's really no, unless you're heavily capacity constrained on your existing cluster, there's no reason not to test some data into your platform, because it won't cost you anything more to try out these different use cases. So it enables you to get more value from your existing investment in Elastic. What I also like to see is this lateral movement of use cases. So the thing about, for example, maybe there's less lateral movement between search and observability and security. But one of the great things about observability is that you are collecting the bulk of the security data already. If you were just going to add something like an audit beat data, or maybe deploy Elastic Agent to add into the data ecosystem, you could easily do a lateral movement because you've got that data ready. So if you're running Elastic Observability at the moment and you go into the security app, it's already surfacing your hosts and things in that view. So you've already got a whole chunk of the data. As long as it's ECS compliant, so as long as it's sitting with the Elasticsearch Common Schema and it's been aligned to that, these apps all work, okay? And you can also take that view into Elastic Enterprise Search as well. You can expand the use case. Same thing across all of these. So you get more value for that initial investment. The other thing is make it easy to find information. So a lot of people don't realize this, but workplace search is entirely free. Workplace search is a very overlooked solution or overlooked product in the enterprise search solution, but it allows you to connect to services like Confluence, so your wiki, like Jira, like your Google Drive, like Dropbox, Teams. Like you can connect to a whole bunch of different content sources and search them as if you were doing I'm going to call it a modern search experience, but we all kind of know what that means, right? It's a single text box where you type in the name of a file or the thing you're looking for, and it auto suggests for you, it types ahead, it tells you what you were searching for earlier, and it gives you results back based on the relevance of what you're looking for. This is entirely free. It doesn't cost anything, with the exception of having to make sure you've got enough capacity on the back end on that cluster to take in the data. But it's not, you could have multiple sources. You could have 15 sources, you could have 5 sources. We don't charge you for the sources of this. So there's a huge amount of value that can be just gained just by teams on their own, right? So you don't have to try and roll this out to your 40,000 person organization. You can just implement it for your team. It's already start to unlock value. This is just a nice kind of animated GIF that sort of shows you how easy it is to find stuff on workplace search. So then the next thing would be around finding stuff you don't know. So I really I'm big on the observability stuff because I got a background many years ago as a developer. So knowing how an application performs is super interesting to me. But I recently was challenged by a client to try and work out or solve their a data analysis challenge. So it was a data set. I had they didn't give me the data set, but I had to generate a data set along the lines of some information that I had no kind of previous experience working with. And I didn't really understand what is the right way to visualize this data, how could we find discrepancies, how could we correlate patterns and things in the data. And all I started to do was ingest that data, put it into Lens and start to drag and drop and start to play around and start to see what's the right way to view this data. What is the kind of metrics that someone looking at this data would need? And I think that Elasticsearch isn't used enough for this, right? You can upload a CSV into Elasticsearch through Kibana and visualize it using something like Lens. Lens is incredibly freeing when it comes to exploration and analysis of data and solving problems around that data. So, I would encourage you, if you have, I can't really cite an example, but there's, in every kind of workplace, there's this thing about well, we don't really know, well, how much time do we spend, estimating stories when we're doing our development lifecycle? How much time is a sprint really in terms of the number of hours we do those kinds of things? And you can pull data from multiple sources and you can put it into Elasticsearch and you can start to visualize it. So I think that there's a huge amount of value and there's an overlooked area. And normally the data sets are tiny. They're a gig of data is a huge amount of data. That doesn't take up any capacity on a cluster. Like when a cluster can do easily, on a hot cluster can store 2 terabytes. I mean, a gig is nothing. So you can put data on your cluster and you can start to play around with it and experiment. All right, I'm going to try and land this plane, I suppose, in the next few minutes. But I see this all over the place. The visibility of all application tiers is a massive issue. So tier 1 applications have paid for expensive incumbent monitoring and observability. I wouldn't even call them observability tools. They have incumbent monitoring tools that look at metrics and logs, and maybe in that environment, Elastic is the log solution. And there's an APM tool. It costs a lot to license it. It's per application or whatever the licensing metric is. So companies have a very limited view of what's actually happening in the environments, and their tier 2, tier 3 applications tend to suffer because of that. Rolling out, and I should put an Elastic Agent logo there, but I'm still quite a fan of the beats. Rolling out beats onto those tier 2 and tier 3 applications gives you visibility of what's happening there, but you don't have to keep it for a long time or it affects the size of your cluster. You can bring it in and you can keep it for 4 or 5 days, a usable window, and delete it off the platform. It really doesn't need to cost you anything, but it gives you visibility into an entire part of your ecosystem that you potentially don't have. So we're not saying, a lot of our conversations are not about displacing the tools and applications that are in clients' environments at the moment. It's more about augmenting those things. So if you can add visibility to your application landscape, you can empower your team with catching issues. Let's say this was like a dev test, UAT, sub-production, all the way through to production rollout. You can catch issues in sub-production before they hit your production instance, for example. This is my favorite one, right? Quantifying the cost of cloud sprawl. So I've done this with my own accounts, where basically, so we can take the billing APIs from all cloud vendors, all major cloud vendors, and using Metricbeat, go and gather that data and visualize it on a single dashboard. So you can then see what is the difference that you're in terms of what you're spending between AWS, GCP, Azure. It's very different. You pay companies to do that for you, right? This is entirely free. You can spin up a cluster, run Metricbeat on a host, collect from those 3 different platforms and visualize this. So it's an often overlooked as well, but really very, very valuable, useful way of getting a handle across your cloud sprawl. And then also this is a dashboard that I've set up, based on, for a client to space in a demo. This is getting from CloudWatch, from Azure Monitor, from GCP Stackdriver. I'm just reading metrics from those different environments and I'm surfacing them on a single dashboard. So you get a better view of what your cloud environments are actually doing. And what also really works well is on our metrics inventory view. So within the metrics app, we have an inventory view. You can group resources by cloud provider. So, it surfaces up as a nice little box with AWS, GCP, and Azure, and all the little virtual machines, for example, containers or resources that you have running in those environments. So bringing together multiple data sources and giving you visibility in one place is incredibly powerful. And then I think Elasticsearch or Elastic Security, like I've mentioned before on that lateral use case spread, when you're collecting information for an observability use case, you're getting the logs of your environments already. It takes a fraction of data to turn it into a security platform. And again, it doesn't cost you anything because Elastic Security is built into the platform, and Elastic Agent is fundamentally free, so you don't pay per installation. So if we take that kind of common behaviors of people, right, that have typically get promoted faster based on the research, we look at common ways that Elastic can help your career. You can maintain connections. You can help other teams, right? So you can build relationships to other parts of the business that maybe have a challenge, and you've got the tools in Elastic to solve the challenges for them. You can solve organizational problems. You can get noticed, but for the right reasons. You can show that you have a growth mindset because you can look at what a single platform that has sort of an unlimited view of the data within your application landscape can see, and you can create value, and ultimately you can make a difference. And I wouldn't it's really great to work for Elastic when you really fundamentally believe that the software platform or the software and the tools that we're building can really make a difference. So I really feel like, even in the free versions of our platform, it's possible to make a huge difference to your organization. And hopefully that is makes sense. Hopefully it all ties together, and you can see how Elastic can really support your own growth in your organization and your own ability to make a difference in the areas where you work. Either you could be the CEO, or you could be an SRE or a developer, or just there is so much that you can do with the Elastic Stack, and it doesn't necessarily take more money. It just takes ideas. So thank you. That is with 1 minute to go. The bulk of my presentation. Thanks very much for sticking with me. If you have for the whole hour, here are some important links. So please go to community.elastic.co/South Africa if you want to, but just community.elastic.co is very good. Then we have a GitHub repo with a call for Meetup. So if you want to see specific topics, hear from people, please post in the repo. And then we've also got the community speaker guide. The one thing I didn't do was put my own email address in here, but we'll put that. You're more than welcome to reach out to me. What I'll do here is I will just add so my email address is tim.brophy@elastic.co. So by all means, please reach out to me.
Thank you so much, Tim. This was really amazing. Thank you very much for going into so much detail for everything that we have been up to recently in Elastic. It was very enjoyable listening to you, and I hope everyone else enjoyed it. Yeah,
Thanks,
if that's all, we can wrap it up, yeah?
Perfect. Thanks very much, everyone, for sticking around.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks, everyone. Wishing you a great evening. Bye.
Bye-bye.